The mountain man's boots sank into dust so fine it rose like smoke with every step, and when he crouched to study the narrow footprints veering wildly off the emigrant trail, he knew whoever had made them would not last another night in this brutal August heat. Thaddeus Irving had tracked elk through blizzards, followed wounded bears into timber so dark a man could not see his own hands, but there was something about the desperate pattern of these tracks that made his chest tighten in a way no animal trail ever had. The prints belonged to someone small, someone whose gait had grown increasingly unsteady as the afternoon wore on, someone who had stopped twice to lean against nothing at all before continuing in the wrong direction entirely. He touched the crushed sage where she had stumbled, felt the lingering warmth of body heat, and rose to scan the rolling grasslands that stretched endlessly toward the distant mountains. The wagon train she had belonged to was 3 miles behind him now, circled for the night near a precious water source, and he had left them only an hour ago when a frantic woman had grabbed his sleeve and told him her friend had wandered away from the group that morning to find privacy and never returned. They had called for her until their voices went hoarse. They had searched in widening circles. And then someone remembered the tracker who had ridden past their camp at dawn, the big man with the buckskin clothing and the rifle across his saddle, and they had sent riders racing after him. Thaddeus was 32 years old and had spent the last decade living in places where months could pass without seeing another human face, and he generally preferred it that way. People complicated things. People wanted conversation and explanations and all manner of social niceties that felt foreign on his tongue after weeks alone. But when that desperate woman had clutched his arm and begged him to find her friend, when she had whispered that the missing woman was 7 months pregnant and had seemed confused that morning, disoriented by the heat, he had turned his horse around without a word. Now he moved quickly but carefully, reading the story the earth told him with every displaced pebble and bent stem of grass. She had walked with purpose at first, perhaps truly just seeking privacy, but then something had gone wrong. The prints showed her stopping, turning in a full circle as if trying to orient herself, then setting off in a direction that would take her farther from the trail with every step. Heat exhaustion, he thought grimly, or perhaps the pregnancy itself had muddled her senses. Either way, she was heading toward empty country with no water and no shade, and the sun was still fierce despite the late hour. He found the first piece of evidence a 1/4 mile farther on, a blue ribbon lying in the dirt, the kind women use to tie back their hair. He tucked it into his belt and kept moving, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The land here was deceptive, all gentle swells and shallow valleys that could hide a person completely until you were nearly on top of them. She could be anywhere. She could have fallen into a wash and broken her leg. She could be lying unconscious in some hidden depression, the sun beating down on her unprotected head. The tracks led him up a long rise and down into a broader valley where the grass grew thicker and a few stunted cottonwoods marked an old stream bed that had gone dry years ago. He was beginning to feel the first cold touch of real fear when he saw her. She was sitting beneath one of the cottonwoods, her back against the trunk and her legs stretched out in front of her, and she was so still that for one terrible moment he thought he was too late. Then her head moved slightly, turning toward him with the slow, vague curiosity of someone not quite present in their own body, and he broke into a run. Up close, she looked even worse than he had feared. Her face was flushed a dangerous crimson, her lips cracked and bleeding, her eyes glassy with confusion. The dress she wore was simple calico, dusty and sweat-stained, and it stretched taut over the obvious curve of her pregnant belly. She was young, he realized, probably not even 25, with light brown hair that had come loose from its pins and clung damply to her neck. "Madam," he said, dropping to one knee beside her and unstopping his canteen, "I need you to drink this." She looked at him without recognition, her gaze sliding past him to focus on something in the middle distance. "I was looking for the wagon," she said, and her voice was a thin rasp. "I need to find the wagon." "I know. I will get you back. But first you drink." He brought the canteen to her lips and tipped it carefully, and after a moment she seemed to understand what it was and began to swallow in great desperate gulps. He let her have several mouthfuls before pulling it away, knowing too much at once would make her sick, and she made a small sound of protest that cut right through him. "More in a minute," he promised. "What is your name?" She blinked at him slowly, and he watched awareness trying to swim up through the haze. "Grace," she said finally. "Grace Porter." "Grace, I am Thaddeus Irving. Your friend sent me to find you. Can you stand?" "I do not know." She looked down at herself as if surprised to find her own body there. "I think I sat down to rest, and then I could not remember which way to go." He could see her struggling against the confusion, fighting to make her thoughts connect properly, and he felt a surge of admiration for her determination. She was in bad shape, but she had not given up. She had found the one bit of shade available, and she had conserved her energy by sitting still, and those choices might well have saved her life. "We are going to get you home," he said firmly. "I'm going to give you a little more water, and then I'm going to lift you onto my horse. Is that all right?" "The baby," she whispered, and her hands moved protectively to her belly. "Is the baby all right?" Thaddeus knew nothing about pregnancy beyond the basic mechanics of it, but he could see movement beneath her dress, a rolling shift that he thought was probably a good sign. "Seems active enough," he told her, "but we need to get you somewhere cool and get more water into you. Can you put your arms around my neck?" She tried. Her movements were slow and uncoordinated, but she managed to drape her arms over his shoulders, and he slid one arm behind her back and the other beneath her knees and lifted her as carefully as he could. She was heavier than she looked, carrying the extra weight of the pregnancy, but he was a big man with muscle built from years of hard living, and she felt almost fragile in his arms. His horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Flint, stood ground-tied 20 feet away and merely flicked an ear as Thaddeus approached with his burden. Getting Grace into the saddle was awkward, but she seemed to be regaining some clarity now that she had water in her, and she helped as much as she could. He settled her sideways across the seat, her legs dangling, and then swung up behind her and gathered her carefully against his chest. "Hold on to me," he instructed, and she leaned into him with a trust that made something in his chest twist uncomfortably. The ride back was slow. He kept Flint to a walk, not wanting to jostle Grace any more than necessary, and he stopped twice to give her more water and check that she was still conscious. Both times she looked at him with eyes that were gradually clearing, the terrible vacant glassiness fading as her body rehydrated, and both times she thanked him in a voice that grew stronger. By the time the wagon train appeared on the horizon, the sun was setting and Grace was fully aware again, though exhausted in a bone-deep way that made her sag against him like a rag doll. She had told him in fragments that she was a widow, that her husband had died of cholera back in Missouri, and she was traveling west with another family who had agreed to take her in. She had a cousin in Oregon who had promised her a place to stay and help with the baby when it came. She had not meant to wander off. She had just felt so hot and so dizzy, and nothing had looked familiar anymore. The wagon train erupted into noise and motion as they approached. People came running, calling Grace's name, and the woman who had sent Thaddeus after her was sobbing with relief. Thaddeus dismounted and lifted Grace down into the waiting arms of her friends, and then stepped back as she was surrounded by fussing, anxious voices. He should have left then. His job was done. But something made him linger as they carried Grace to one of the wagons and settled her on a pallet with blankets and water and food. Something made him stay while the wagon master, a grizzled man named Thompson, pumped his hand and offered him money for his trouble. "Keep it," Thaddeus said gruffly. "Just make sure she gets proper care." "We will," Thompson promised, "though I will tell you true, this is not a good train for a woman in her condition. We have no doctor, no midwife. When her time comes, she will be in the hands of whoever has birthed babies before, and that is a risk." Thaddeus frowned. "Where is this train headed?" "Oregon Territory, most of us. But we have another 6 weeks of travel at least, maybe more if we hit bad weather. That baby could come before we reach anywhere resembling civilization." It should not have mattered to him. Grace Porter was not his responsibility. He had found her and returned her safely, and that was the end of it. He had his own life, his own path. He'd been headed up into the mountains to trap for the winter, the same as he did every year, and he did not need complications. But when he looked at the wagon where Grace lay, when he thought about her giving birth on the trail with no real help, something in him balked. "I know a place," he heard himself say, "about 3 days north of here, just below the Wyoming border. There's a trading post run by a French-Canadian named Bissonnette. His wife is Lakota, and she is as good a healer as any doctor I have ever met. If you could spare a wagon and someone to drive it, I could take Mrs. Porter there. She would be safe until the baby comes, and after that she could decide whether to continue on to Oregon or settle somewhere closer." Thompson looked at him with surprise, and something that might have been respect. That is generous of you, Irving. But why would you do such a thing? Thaddeus did not have a good answer for that. He shrugged, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. Seems like the right thing to do, he said finally. It took some discussion, and Grace herself had to be consulted, but by the time full dark had fallen, it was decided. One of the families traveling with the train had an extra wagon they had been planning to sell in Oregon, and they agreed to let Grace have it in exchange for a fraction of what Thaddeus offered to pay from his own carefully hoarded money. Another family contributed a team of mules. Supplies were gathered, enough food and water to last the journey, and Grace was moved into the wagon with a proper feather mattress and quilts and everything the women could think of to make her comfortable. She was awake when Thaddeus came to check on her before they departed at dawn, and she reached out to catch his hand as he stood beside the wagon. "You do not have to do this," she said softly. "You have already saved my life. You do not owe me anything more." Her hand was small in his, calloused from work but gentle, and he found himself reluctant to let go. "I know that," he said, "but I'm doing it anyway." "Why?" He met her eyes, saw the genuine confusion there, and realized she truly did not understand why a stranger would go so far out of his way for her. It made him wonder what her life had been like before this, what kind of people she had known. "Because you need help," he said simply, "and I can give it." Something shifted in her expression then, a cautious warmth that had not been there before, and she squeezed his fingers gently. "Thank you, Thaddeus Irving." The sound of his full name in her voice did something strange to his heartbeat, but he told himself it was just the strangeness of the situation, the unexpected intimacy of caring for someone in distress. He squeezed back, and then released her hand, stepping away before he could think too hard about why he did not want to. They left with the sunrise, Thaddeus riding alongside the wagon and leading Flint on a long rein. The wagon was driven by a young man named Samuel who had volunteered for the job, but it quickly became clear that Samuel's skills lay in other areas, and Thaddeus ended up taking over the reins himself, tying Flint to the back and settling onto the hard wooden seat. Grace rode inside the wagon for the first few hours, resting in the dim interior, but by mid-morning she emerged and climbed carefully onto the seat beside him. She had changed into a clean dress, a faded green that brought out the color of her hazel eyes, and she had braided her hair neatly. She looked tired still, but the dangerous flush was gone from her face, and her gaze was clear. "You should be resting," Thaddeus said as she settled beside him. "I have been resting. Now I would like some company." She glanced at him sideways, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Unless you prefer silence. I know some men do." "I am used to silence," he admitted, "but I do not mind conversation." She laughed, a soft sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. "That is the most reluctant acceptance of my company I have ever heard." He felt his face heat, unsure if she was teasing or offended, and when he looked at her he saw that she was definitely teasing. It had been so long since he'd engaged in this kind of banter that he had forgotten how it worked. "I did not mean it like that," he said awkwardly. "I just meant that I am not much of a talker." "Then I will talk enough for both of us," she said decisively. "Tell me about this trading post we are going to. You said the woman there is a healer?" He relaxed slightly, grateful for the concrete topic. "Yes, Marie Bissonnette. She learned medicine from her grandmother, who was a respected healer among her people. I have seen her set broken bones, treat fevers, even help with difficult births. If anyone can make sure you and the baby come through safely, it is her." "How do you know her?" "I trade there sometimes. Furs, mostly. Bissonnette pays fair prices and he does not ask too many questions." Grace absorbed this quietly, her hands folded over her belly. The baby was moving again, visible even through the fabric of her dress, and Thaddeus found himself fascinated despite himself. He had seen pregnant animals plenty of times, had even helped deliver foals and calves when necessary, but there was something different about seeing a human child moving within its mother, something that made the miracle of it real in a way he had never quite considered before. "You can touch it if you want," Grace said softly, and when he jerked his gaze back to her face, she was watching him with gentle amusement. "The baby, I mean. It does not hurt." "I do not think that would be proper." "Proper went out the window when you carried me through the wilderness in your arms," she pointed out. Besides, there is no one here to be scandalized but the mules, and they do not care." He hesitated, then reached out cautiously and placed his palm against the side of her belly. For a moment there was nothing, and then he felt it. A firm pressure that pushed back against his hand, like something rolling over inside. His breath caught. "That is the baby. That is the baby. Very active today. I think all the excitement yesterday stirred him up." "Him?" she shrugged. "I have been calling it him, but I have no way of knowing. It could just as easily be a girl." Thaddeus kept his hand there a moment longer, feeling another shift, another gentle push, and then pulled back reluctantly. "Seems strong. I hope so. This is not an easy world to be born into." There was a weight to those words, a shadow that passed across her face, and he wanted suddenly to know everything about her, where she came from, what her husband had been like, how she had ended up alone and pregnant on a wagon train headed into uncertainty. But he did not ask because he was not sure he had the right, and because some part of him understood that trust had to be earned slowly. They traveled through country that was both beautiful and harsh, wide plains of grass that rippled like water in the wind, broken by rocky outcroppings and dry creek beds. The heat of the day was fierce, but Thaddeus knew how to find shade during the worst hours, pulling the wagon beneath stands of cottonwood or rocky overhangs where the air was a few degrees cooler. Grace bore the discomfort without complaint, though he could see it wearing on her, the way she shifted constantly trying to find a comfortable position, the way she pressed her hands to the small of her back, and winced. On the second night, they made camp beside a small spring that bubbled up from between two boulders, sweet water that filled their canteens and allowed Grace to wash properly for the first time since her ordeal. Thaddeus set up a privacy screen using a blanket and some rope, and she disappeared behind it with a grateful sigh while he tended the mules and built a fire. He was cooking bacon and beans when she emerged, her hair still damp and hanging loose down her back, and she looked so much younger and more vulnerable that he had to consciously stop himself from staring. She had changed into a nightgown with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and she moved carefully, one hand supporting her belly as she came to sit beside the fire. "That smells wonderful," she said. "It is just bacon and beans. It is the best thing I've smelled in days." He served her a generous portion and watched as she ate with an appetite that seemed healthy, a good sign. His own food sat mostly untouched while he made sure she had enough, and when she noticed, she fixed him with a stern look that was undermined by the smile tugging at her lips. "Thaddeus Irving, you eat your dinner." "I am fine." "Yes, madam." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling between them, and overhead the stars began to emerge in a sky so vast and clear it seemed like a man could see all the way to heaven. This was Thaddeus's favorite time of day when he was alone in the wilderness, this quiet hour when the work was done and he could simply exist. But he found that sharing it with Grace did not diminish the peace. If anything, her presence added something he had not known was missing. "Tell me about yourself," Grace said eventually, setting her empty plate aside. "You know all about my situation, but I know nothing of yours. Do you have family? A home somewhere?" "No family to speak of. My parents died when I was young, and I was raised by an uncle who was not particularly interested in the job. I left as soon as I was old enough to make my own way." "And you have been alone ever since?" "Mostly. I have friends at various trading posts and forts. I'm not a complete hermit, but I prefer the wild country to towns." She was quiet for a moment, studying him in the firelight. "That sounds lonely." "Lonely is having to make small talk with people you do not like," he said. "Being alone is different." "Is it?" Her voice was gentle, not challenging but genuinely curious. "I think I used to believe that too. But now, after everything, I'm not sure anymore. When my husband died, I thought I would rather be alone than risk that kind of pain again. But being truly alone, being lost out there yesterday with no one, that was terrifying in a way I was not prepared for." Thaddeus poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks spiral up into the darkness. "I'm sorry about your husband." "Thank you. He was a good man. We were only married 2 years, and I'm still getting used to the idea that he is gone." She placed a hand on her belly. "I keep thinking he should be here for this, that he should get to meet his child, and the unfairness of it makes me so angry sometimes I can hardly breathe. Anger is all right, better than pretending it does not hurt. Is that what you do? When things hurt, you just get angry?" He considered that. "No, I leave. I go somewhere no one can find me, and I stay there until the feeling passes. Does it work? Sometimes, she smiled sadly. I wish I could do that, but I do not have that luxury anymore. I have a baby coming, and I need to find a way to build a life for both of us, and I cannot do that by running away. The courage in her voice, the sheer determined strength of her, made something in his chest ache. She had every reason to give up, to collapse under the weight of her grief and fear, but she was still fighting. She was still moving forward. It shamed him a little, made him wonder if his years of solitude were as much about strength as he liked to tell himself, or if they were just another form of cowardice. "You are braver than you think," he said quietly. "I do not feel brave. I feel terrified most of the time." Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite it. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting the firelight, and then she reached out and took his hand. It was a simple gesture, probably meant as nothing more than gratitude, but it sent warmth flooding through him in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. I know you do not understand why it matters so much to me, but it does." He did not trust his voice, so he just squeezed her hand gently and nodded, and they sat like that until the fire burned low and Grace's eyes started to drift closed. He helped her into the wagon and made sure she was settled comfortably, then laid out his own bedroll beneath the stars and tried not to think about how right it had felt to hold her hand. The third day of travel was harder. The sun was relentless and Grace was clearly exhausted, her body pushed to its limits by the combination of pregnancy and the recent ordeal. She dozed fitfully in the wagon while Thaddeus pushed the mules as hard as he dared, wanting to reach the trading post before nightfall. His own body was weary, the lack of sleep catching up with him, but he kept going through sheer force of will. They reached Bissonnette's trading post just as the sun was setting, a rough collection of log buildings nestled in a valley with a creek running through it. Smoke rose from the main building's chimney, and Thaddeus felt relief wash over him so powerfully it made him dizzy. He brought the wagon to a stop in front of the main door and climbed down, his legs stiff from hours of sitting. Before he could knock, the door swung open and René Bissonnette himself stepped out, a stocky man with a wild gray beard and shrewd eyes that took in the situation instantly. Thaddeus Irving," he said in his heavily accented English. "I did not expect to see you until the snow flies. What brings you here in the middle of summer, and who is that in your wagon?" "A woman who needs help," Thaddeus said simply. "Grace Porter. She is 7 months pregnant and had a bad scare a few days ago. I was hoping Marie could look after her until the baby comes." Bissonnette's expression softened immediately. Of course, Marie," he shouted back into the building. "We have a guest who needs you." Marie Bissonnette appeared moments later, a tall woman with long black hair and the kind of calm, assessing gaze that missed nothing. She took one look at the wagon and moved past both men without a word, climbing up to peer inside. "Hello," Thaddeus heard her say gently. "My name is Marie. You are safe now." Grace's reply was too soft for him to hear, but Marie nodded and reached in to help her out. Thaddeus stepped forward instinctively, and together they got Grace down from the wagon and into the house. Inside was warm and clean, the walls lined with shelves holding all manner of goods for trade. Marie guided Grace to a chair beside the fireplace and knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "Tell me how you feel," Marie said, and her voice had a musical quality, soothing and sure. Grace explained, haltingly, what had happened, and Marie listened with complete attention. When Grace finished, Marie nodded and began a gentle examination, feeling Grace's belly, checking her pulse, looking into her eyes. Thaddeus stood awkwardly by the door, unsure whether he should stay or go, until Bissonnette clapped him on the shoulder and steered him toward a table. "Sit," Bissonnette ordered. "You look like you have not slept in days. Marie will take care of your woman." "She is not my woman," Thaddeus said automatically. Bissonnette gave him a knowing look, but said nothing, just pushed a cup of something hot and alcoholic into his hands. Thaddeus drank it gratefully, feeling the tension in his shoulders begin to ease for the first time since this whole situation had started. Marie worked over Grace for some time, asking questions in her gentle way, and finally she sat back with a satisfied expression. "The baby is fine," she announced. "Strong heartbeat, good movement. You were very dehydrated, but Thaddeus got fluids into you quickly enough that there is no lasting harm. What you need now is rest, good food, and no stress. You will stay here until the baby comes. Yes?" Grace looked uncertainly at Thaddeus as if seeking his permission, and he nodded immediately. "That is why we came." "I cannot pay you," Grace said to Marie, her voice tight with worry. "I have almost no money, and what I have I will need for after the baby is born." Marie waved a hand dismissively. "We do not need money. This is what neighbors do for each other. You will stay, you will have your baby, and when you are strong enough you will decide where to go next. It is simple." Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks before she could stop them, and Marie gathered her into a gentle hug, murmuring soothing words. Thaddeus looked away, his throat tight, and met Bissonnette's eyes across the room. The older man was smiling. "You did a good thing bringing her here," Bissonnette said quietly. "I just did what anyone would do." No, most men would have left her with the wagon train and told themselves it was not their problem. "You are a better man than you give yourself credit for, Thaddeus Irving." Thaddeus did not know what to say to that, so he just drank more of whatever Bissonnette had given him and watched as Marie helped Grace to her feet and led her toward the back of the building where the living quarters were. Grace looked back once before she disappeared through the doorway, her eyes finding his, and she mouthed the words, "Thank you," with such feeling that his chest hurt. He should have left that night. His job was done. Grace was safe with people who would care for her, and he had his own life to get back to. The mountains were calling, the high country where the air was thin and cold even in summer, where he could trap beaver and marten and forget about the complexities of human connection. But something kept him there. When Bissonnette offered him a bed for the night, he accepted. When morning came and he told himself he would leave after breakfast, he found reasons to stay. The mules needed shoeing, the wagon needed repairs. He should make sure Grace was truly settled before he went. The truth, which he was reluctant to examine too closely, was that he did not want to leave her. Grace spent most of that first day sleeping, her body demanding the rest it had been denied. Thaddeus kept himself busy with work around the trading post, helping Bissonnette repair a section of roof and chop wood for the winter stores. It was good physical labor that left him pleasantly tired, and it kept his mind from wandering too much. But when Grace emerged in the late afternoon, looking rested and stronger, he found himself abandoning his work immediately to check on her. "You should be resting," he said, echoing his words from days before. She laughed. "I have been resting all day. If I rest any more, I will forget how to walk. Marie said I could sit outside for a while if I wanted, and I was hoping you might sit with me." They settled on a bench outside the main building, looking out over the valley as the shadows lengthened. The creek bubbled nearby, and birds called from the trees. It was peaceful in a way that Thaddeus usually only found alone, but Grace's presence did not break that peace. If anything, she enhanced it. "This is a beautiful place," Grace said softly. "I can see why you come here. It is far enough from civilization to feel free, but close enough that you can get supplies when you need them. Bissonnette is a good man. He does not judge, does not pry." "Unlike most people." "Unlike most people," he agreed. She was quiet for a moment, her hands resting on her belly, and then she said, "What will you do now? Will you stay for a while, or do you need to move on?" It was the question he had been asking himself all day. The sensible answer was to move on. He had done what he set out to do, but when he opened his mouth to say that, different words came out. "I thought I might stay for a bit, if Bissonnette does not mind the extra help, just to make sure you are settled and everything is all right." The smile that lit her face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "I would like that," she said. "I would like that very much." And so he stayed. One day became 2, then a week, then longer. He told himself it was just practical, that a woman in Grace's condition needed someone to look after her, but he knew that was not entirely true. The truth was that he was drawn to her in a way he could not explain and did not entirely understand. She was easy to talk to despite his lack of practice with conversation. She laughed at his dry observations about the world. She listened when he spoke about the mountains and the animals and the weather with an attention that made him feel like his words mattered. And more than that, she was strong. He had expected her to be fragile after what she had been through, but instead, she threw herself into life at the trading post with determination. She helped Marie with cooking and mending. She organized the dry goods shelves. She even began working on baby clothes, cutting and sewing with careful stitches while she sat outside in the afternoon sun. Thaddeus found himself constantly aware of where she was, what she was doing. He brought her wildflowers he found on his morning rides, awkwardly presented with mumbled explanations about how he thought they were pretty and she might like them. She always accepted them with delight, arranging them in a tin cup by her bedside. He carved her a wooden spoon when he noticed her struggling with the heavy iron one Marie used, making sure the handle was long enough that she did not have to lean over the pot so far. She used it every day, and every time he saw it, his chest felt warm. Marie watched them with knowing eyes and said nothing, but Thaddeus caught her smiling sometimes when she thought he was not looking. Bissonnette was less subtle, teasing him mercilessly about how a man who claimed to love solitude was certainly spending a lot of time sitting on benches with pretty widows. "I am just making sure she is all right," Thaddeus said defensively. "Ahenda, of course you are," Bissonnette agreed, his eyes twinkling. "Just as I'm the king of France." The weeks passed in a rhythm that felt dangerously close to domestic. Thaddeus had never lived like this, never stayed in one place long enough to develop routines, but he found himself falling into them easily. He woke with the sun and checked on the horses before breakfast. He worked through the morning, helping Bissonnette with whatever needed doing. He had lunch with Grace, the two of them sitting together while she told him stories about her childhood in Missouri, about her parents who had died in a fire when she was 16, about her husband, who had been kind but not particularly imaginative. He worked through the afternoon, but always stopped in time to sit with her as the sun set, watching the light change over the valley. In the evenings, they talked, really talked, in a way Thaddeus had never done with another person. She asked him about his life, and he found himself telling her things he had never spoken aloud, about the uncle who had grudgingly taken him in after his parents died, but made it clear he was a burden, about the first time he had gone into the mountains alone at 16 and felt like he could finally breathe, about the loneliness that sometimes crept up on him in the dead of winter when he went weeks without speaking to another soul. And she told him her truths in return, about how her marriage had been more about companionship than passion, a practical arrangement between two people who liked each other but never quite loved each other the way the poets wrote about how her husband's death had been terrible, but how she had also felt guilty because part of her had been relieved to be free of the expectations that came with being a wife, about how scared she was of becoming a mother, of being responsible for another life when she barely knew how to manage her own. "You will be a good mother," Thaddeus said one evening after she'd confessed these fears. "You are strong and kind, and you do not give up. That is what children need." "How do you know? You said yourself you do not have much experience with families." "I know because I see who you are. I see how you help Marie even when you are tired. I see how you never complain even though I know you are uncomfortable. I see your determination. Any child would be lucky to have you." She was quiet for a long moment, and when he looked at her, he saw tears glistening in her eyes. "No one has ever said anything like that to me before." He reached out and took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them over the weeks. "Then people have not been paying attention." She laced her fingers through his and held on tight, and they sat like that until the stars came out. It was during the 5th week of his stay that Thaddeus finally admitted to himself that what he felt for Grace was more than simple concern for her welfare. It happened on an unremarkable afternoon when he was bringing in wood for the stove and heard her laughing at something Marie had said. The sound stopped him in his tracks, made his heart do something complicated in his chest, and he realized with a jolt that he wanted to hear that laugh every day for the rest of his life. The realization terrified him. He had spent years building a life that required no one, that could not be disrupted by the whims or needs of others. He had told himself he preferred it that way, that the freedom was worth the loneliness. But now, standing there with his arms full of firewood and Grace's laugh echoing in his ears, he understood that he had been lying to himself. He wanted this. He wanted the domesticity, the routines, the quiet evenings and shared meals. He wanted Grace, not just for now but for always, and the wanting was so fierce it almost brought him to his knees. But wanting and having were two different things. Grace had not given any indication that she felt the same way. She was kind to him, friendly even, but she treated him the same way she treated Bissonnette or Marie or anyone else who showed her compassion. There was nothing to suggest she saw him as anything more than the man who had saved her life. And even if she did feel something, what could he offer her? He had no home, no steady income, no stability. He lived on the edges of civilization, moving with the seasons, and that was no life for a woman with a baby. She deserved better than a wandering mountain man who did not know how to stay in one place. So he said nothing. He kept his feelings locked away and told himself it was for the best. Grace needed a friend right now, not a man complicating her life with unwanted affection. He would stay until the baby came, make sure she was safe, and then he would do what he always did. He would leave. But the resolution felt like ash in his mouth. Grace, for her part, seemed oblivious to his internal struggle. She continued to seek out his company, to smile when he appeared, to share her thoughts and fears with an openness that humbled him. The baby was very active now, and she often invited him to feel it moving, laughing at his expressions of wonder when a tiny foot or hand pressed against his palm. "Do you think about having children of your own?" she asked him once, her hand covering his where it rested on her belly. "I never did before," he admitted. "It did not seem like something that fit with the life I chose." "But now?" He met her eyes, saw the genuine curiosity there, and chose his words carefully. "Now I think I might have been wrong about a lot of things." She studied his face for a long moment, and he thought he saw something shift in her expression, a softening or maybe a question, but then the baby gave a particularly strong kick and she gasped, and the moment passed. It was Marie who finally forced the issue. She cornered him one morning while he was saddling his horse for a ride, her dark eyes serious. "You are in love with her," she said bluntly. It was not a question. Thaddeus opened his mouth to deny it, but the look on Marie's face stopped him. She would see through any lie, and he respected her too much to try. "Yes," he said simply. "Does she know?" "No." "Why not?" He laughed bitterly. "Because I have nothing to offer her, because she deserves better than a man who has spent his entire adult life running from anything that looks like responsibility, because she has enough to worry about without me adding to it." Marie was quiet for a moment, then she stepped closer and put a hand on his arm. "Thaddeus, do you know what Grace told me yesterday? She said that for the first time since her husband died, she feels like she might be able to build a real life again. She said that being here, with people who care about her, has given her hope. And when I asked her what changed, she said it was you. She said you made her believe that there are still good men in the world, men who help without expecting anything in return." His throat was tight. "That does not mean she wants me to declare feelings for her." "Maybe not, but maybe she does. Maybe she is waiting for you to give her a sign that you see her as more than just someone to be rescued. You are so busy protecting her from your feelings that it has not occurred to you that she might want them." "What if I am wrong? What if I tell her and it ruins everything?" "What if you do not tell her and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been?" Marie countered. "You are a brave man, Thaddeus Irving. You track dangerous animals. You survive blizzards and floods. You live in places that would kill most men. Surely you can find the courage to tell one woman how you feel." She left him with that, walking back toward the house with her long stride, and Thaddeus stood there holding his horse's reins and feeling like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. He thought about it all day, turning the problem over in his mind like a puzzle he could not quite solve. By evening, he had decided Marie was right. He had to tell Grace the truth. If she did not feel the same way, at least he would know, and he could leave with a clear conscience. And if she did, if by some miracle she felt even a fraction of what he felt, then maybe they could figure out a way forward together. He found her sitting on their bench at sunset, same as always, and his heart began to hammer against his ribs as he approached. She looked up and smiled, patting the space beside her in invitation, and he sat down feeling like he was about to jump off a cliff. "You are quiet tonight," she observed. "Is something wrong?" "No. Yes. Maybe." He took a breath, trying to organize the words that were tangling in his head. "I need to tell you something." She turned to face him fully, her expression concerned. "All right?" "I am not good at this," he warned. "I have spent so long alone that I do not know how to say things properly. But Marie told me I need to be honest with you, and I think she is right. Honest about what? He made himself meet her eyes, made himself say the words, even though his heart felt like it might beat out of his chest. About how I feel. About you. Grace, I know you came here because you needed a safe place to have your baby, and I know I was supposed to just bring you and leave. But I did not leave, and the reason I did not leave is because I did not want to. Because somewhere along the way these past weeks, I have fallen in love with you. Her eyes went very wide, her lips parting in surprise, and he rushed on before he lost his nerve. I know I have no right to feel this way. I know you have more important things to worry about. I know my life is not what anyone would choose, all wandering and uncertainty. But I cannot keep pretending I do not feel it, and Marie said you deserve to know the truth. So that is the truth. I love you. And if you do not feel the same way, I understand. And I will leave tomorrow and not bother you again. But if there is any chance, any possibility that you might feel something too, then I need you to tell me. Because I would do anything, give up anything, to be with you. He stopped, breathing hard, and waited for her response. She was staring at him with an expression he could not read, and the silence stretched out so long he started to think he'd made a terrible mistake. Then she reached out and took both of his hands in hers, holding them tightly. "Thaddeus," she said, and her voice was shaking. "I have been waiting for weeks for you to say something like that." His brain took a moment to process the words. "You have?" "Yes. I thought I was imagining it, the way you looked at me sometimes, the way you always made sure I was comfortable and happy. I told myself it was just kindness, that I should not read more into it. But I wanted it to be more. I have wanted it to be more almost from the beginning." "You have feelings for me?" He heard the disbelief in his own voice and did not care. "I am in love with you," she said, and now she was crying, tears streaming down her face even as she smiled. "You are strong and kind, and you make me feel safe in a way I've never felt before. You listen when I talk. You care about what I think. You look at me like I am something precious, and I have never had that before. My husband was a good man, but what I feel for you is so much more than what I felt for him. It terrifies me how much I love you." Thaddeus did not remember deciding to move, but suddenly he was gathering her into his arms, holding her as carefully as he could given the awkward bulk of her belly between them. She buried her face in his shoulder, and he pressed his cheek to her hair, and they stayed like that, clinging to each other while the sun sank below the horizon. "I do not know how to do this," he said when he finally trusted his voice. "I do not know how to be what you need." "Neither do I, but we can figure it out together." She pulled back enough to look at him, and he reached up to wipe the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. "I do not need you to be anything other than who you are, Thaddeus. You are enough. More than enough." He kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that tasted of salt from her tears, and it was nothing like the wild, passionate kisses he had heard described in songs and stories. It was tender and careful and full of promise, and it felt like coming home. When they pulled apart, Grace was smiling through her tears, and he realized that he was smiling too, a big, stupid grin that he could not have wiped off his face if he tried. "What do we do now?" he asked. "I do not know. I suppose we just keep going, one day at a time. We wait for the baby to come, and then we figure out what comes next. I do not have a home to offer you. I do not have much of anything. We will build something. Together. It does not have to be big or fancy. It just has to be ours." The certainty in her voice steadied him, and he nodded slowly. "Together," he repeated, testing the word. It felt foreign, but also right, like a key sliding into a lock. They sat together until full dark, talking about possibilities and futures in low voices, and when Grace finally yawned and admitted she needed to sleep, Thaddeus walked her to the door of the trading post and kissed her goodnight with a tenderness that made her sigh against his mouth. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too." The words were easier the second time, and he suspected they would get easier still with practice. The next morning, everything felt different. The same sun rose over the same valley, the same work needed doing, but Thaddeus moved through it all with a lightness he had never experienced before. He caught himself whistling while he chopped wood, something he had not done since he was a boy. And when Grace appeared with a cup of coffee for him, he set down the axe and kissed her right there in full view of anyone who might be watching. She laughed and swatted at him playfully. "Bissonnette is going to tease you mercilessly." "I do not care. You say that now." But when Bissonnette did indeed tease him later, congratulating him loudly on finally pulling his head out of his backside and seeing what was right in front of him, Thaddeus just grinned and took it. Because it did not matter what Bissonnette said. All that mattered was that Grace loved him and he loved her, and they were going to build a life together. The baby came 3 weeks later, on a warm September morning when the aspens were just beginning to turn gold. Thaddeus had been out checking traps and returned to find the trading post in organized chaos, Marie issuing calm instructions while Grace labored in the back room. He felt panic rise in his throat, helplessness crashing over him, but Marie intercepted him before he could do anything foolish. "She is fine," Marie said firmly. "Everything is progressing normally. This is what birth looks like. It is hard work, but she is strong, and I have helped bring many babies into this world. You will wait out here, and when it is time, I will call you." "Can I see her? Can I talk to her?" Marie considered him for a moment, then nodded. "Quickly. She is between pains right now." He slipped into the back room, his heart in his throat, and found Grace propped up on pillows with her face flushed and damp with sweat. She looked exhausted but also fiercely determined, and when she saw him, her expression softened. "Thaddeus? You came back." "Of course I came back. How are you?" "It hurts," she said bluntly, "but Marie says I'm doing well. The baby should be here by this afternoon." He took her hand, feeling utterly useless. "What can I do?" "Just knowing you are here helps. Just knowing that when this is over, you will be waiting. That is enough." Another contraction started then, and he saw the pain wash over her face, saw her grip the sheets with white-knuckled hands, and it took everything in him not to fall apart. Marie shooed him out gently but firmly, and he spent the next several hours pacing the main room like a caged animal. Bissonnette tried to distract him with conversation, but Thaddeus could not focus on anything except the sounds coming from the back room. Grace was not screaming, but he could hear her breathing, hard and fast, and Marie's low voice offering encouragement. Time seemed to stretch and warp, and he started to understand viscerally what it meant to feel helpless. Then, just when he thought he could not stand it anymore, he heard a different sound, a thin, wailing cry that started weak and then grew stronger, and his knees nearly buckled with relief. Marie appeared in the doorway moments later, smiling broadly. "You can come meet your new daughter now." His daughter. Except she was not his daughter, not by blood, but the fierce surge of love and protectiveness he felt in that moment made biology irrelevant. He followed Marie into the back room on shaking legs and found Grace propped up in bed with a tiny bundle in her arms. She looked up at him with exhausted joy shining in her eyes. "Thaddeus, come meet her." He approached slowly, feeling like he was walking on sacred ground, and looked down at the baby in Grace's arms. She was impossibly small, red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to be trying to focus on the world around her. She was perfect. "Can I hold her?" His voice came out rough. Grace carefully transferred the baby into his arms, showing him how to support her head, and Thaddeus looked down at the tiny life cradled against his chest and felt something fundamental shift inside him. This child was not his by birth, but she was his by choice, by love, and he would protect her and care for her with everything he had. "What will you name her?" he asked Grace softly. "I was thinking about that during the labor. I want to name her Clementine. It means merciful, and I feel like we have been shown so much mercy. Meeting you was mercy. Being brought here was mercy. She is a symbol of that." "Clementine," Thaddeus repeated, and the baby made a small sound as if acknowledging her name. "It is perfect." He stayed there for a long time, just holding Clementine while Grace dozed, and he made silent promises to this child. He would be there for her. He would teach her about the world. He would make sure she grew up knowing she was loved and wanted. He would be the father his own father had never had the chance to be. When Marie finally shooed him out so Grace could rest properly, he went outside and stood in the afternoon sun and let the enormity of what had just happened wash over him. His life had changed irrevocably. He was part of a family now, responsible for two people who depended on him. It should have felt like a trap, like the end of his freedom, but instead, it felt like he had been given a gift beyond measure. Grace recovered quickly, her body bouncing back with the resilience of youth, and within days she was up and moving around, Clementine always nearby. Thaddeus was amazed by how naturally she took to motherhood, how she seemed to instinctively know what the baby needed, and he was equally amazed by how much he loved being part of it all, how he found himself constantly checking on them, bringing Grace food, holding Clementine so Grace could rest, marveling at every tiny yawn and stretch. They fell into a new rhythm, the three of them, and it felt right in a way nothing in Thaddeus's life ever had before. But he knew they could not stay at the trading post forever. Bissonnette and Marie had been more than generous, but they needed to build something of their own, a home where they could raise Clementine and any other children who might come along. He broached the subject with Grace one evening, about 2 weeks after Clementine's birth. They were sitting on their bench, Clementine asleep in Grace's arms, and the autumn air had just enough chill in it to suggest winter was not far off. "I have been thinking," he said carefully, "about what comes next, about where we should go." Grace looked at him with interest. "I've been thinking about that too. Do you have somewhere in mind?" "There's a valley I know, about 30 miles west of here. Good water, good hunting, sheltered from the worst of the winter storms. It is unclaimed land, at least as far as I know. We could build there. Start our own place." "Just us? Or would others come?" He considered that. "I do not know, but if they did, if other people wanted to settle nearby, I think I would be all right with that. I used to think I needed to be alone to be happy, but you have shown me different. Maybe what I really needed was just to find the right people." She smiled at him, and even in the fading light he could see the love in her eyes. "I think that sounds perfect. A valley of our own, a place we can build together. Yes, let us do that." They spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Bissonnette helped them acquire a good wagon and a team of sturdy horses, refusing to take full payment despite Thaddeus's insistence. Marie packed them supplies and gave Grace medicines and instructions for caring for Clementine through the winter. And when the day came for them to leave, there were tears and promises to visit come spring. The journey to the valley was slow but peaceful. The weather held clear and cool, and Clementine was an easy baby, content to sleep in a padded box in the wagon while they traveled. They reached the valley on a bright October afternoon, and as Thaddeus guided the wagon through the entrance, he felt a sense of homecoming that stunned him. The valley was just as he remembered it, a bowl of green grass surrounded by pine-covered hills, with a clear creek running through the center. There were stands of aspen that were bright gold in their fall colors, and the mountains rose blue and distant beyond. It was beautiful and wild and exactly what they needed. They set up a temporary camp that first night, and Thaddeus held Grace close with Clementine nestled between them, and he felt more content than he ever had in his life. Building a cabin before winter set in was ambitious, but Thaddeus threw himself into the work with a determination born of necessity. He cut logs from the surrounding forest, dragging them to the site he had chosen near the creek. Grace helped where she could, though her primary job was caring for Clementine, and she made sure Thaddeus ate regularly and did not push himself to exhaustion. The work was hard and sometimes frustrating, but there was also deep satisfaction in it. Every log that went up, every corner that came square, was a piece of the home they were building together. By the time the first snow fell in early November, they had 4 walls, a roof, and a stone fireplace that drew properly. It was rough and small, just one room with a loft for sleeping, but it was theirs. They spent that first winter learning how to be a family. Thaddeus hunted and trapped to provide meat and furs they could trade. Grace kept the cabin warm and clean, cooked meals that filled the small space with wonderful smells, and cared for Clementine as she grew from a tiny newborn into a baby with a personality. They talked through the long, dark evenings, sharing dreams and plans, and they grew closer with every passing day. There were hard moments, too. Times when supplies ran low and they had to stretch every bit of food. Times when Clementine was sick and they were terrified they might lose her. Times when the isolation pressed down and Grace admitted she missed having other women to talk to. But they weathered every challenge together, and each time they came through it, their bond was stronger. In early spring, Thaddeus rode back to the trading post and returned with news. Two families had asked about the valley, wondering if there might be room to settle. One was a young couple with a baby on the way, looking for a fresh start. The other was an older man who had recently lost his wife and wanted to be somewhere he could be useful. "What did you tell them?" Grace asked. "I told them they were welcome. If we are going to make a real life here, we will need neighbors. We will need community. I know that now." Grace threw her arms around him, Clementine squealing between them, and he knew he had made the right choice. The settlement grew slowly over the next few years. The two families came that first spring and built their own cabins. Others followed, drawn by word of good land and a welcoming community. Thaddeus found himself in the unexpected role of leader, helping new families get established, settling disputes, organizing work parties for larger projects. It was not a role he had ever imagined for himself, but he discovered he was good at it. And through it all, his love for Grace only deepened. She was his partner in every sense of the word, working beside him to build not just a home, but a community. She organized the women to help each other, taught school to the children who arrived, and somehow still managed to be the warm, loving presence that made their cabin a true home. Clementine grew into a bright, curious toddler, and then into a little girl who followed Thaddeus everywhere, chattering constantly. He taught her about the woods and the animals, showed her how to read tracks and predict weather. She was fearless and loving, and he could not imagine his life without her. 2 years after they settled in the valley, Grace told him she was pregnant again. The news filled him with joy and terror in equal measure, but this time he was there for every moment of the pregnancy, every change and discomfort, and when their son was born on a summer evening, he was the first to hold him. They named him Amos, a name that meant strong and courageous, and from the very beginning he lived up to it. Where Clementine was curious and talkative, Amos was quiet and determined, attacking every challenge with focused intensity. Thaddeus loved him with the same fierce protectiveness he felt for Clementine, and watching the two children grow up together filled him with a happiness he had not known was possible. 3 years later, Grace gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Jasper. He was the sweet one, the peacemaker, the child who noticed when others were hurting and tried to make it better. The 3 children together were loud and chaotic and perfect, and Thaddeus frequently found himself watching them play and wondering how he had gotten so lucky. The settlement grew into a small town with a general store and a blacksmith and eventually even a school building. They decided to name it Thorn Creek after the wild rose bushes that grew thick along the creek in summer. Thaddeus owned the land the town sat on, but he made sure every family who settled there had a piece to call their own, creating something that felt less like ownership and more like stewardship. Grace became a pillar of the community, the woman everyone went to for advice or comfort or help. She tended the sick, mediated arguments, and somehow always had room at her table for one more person. Thaddeus watched her flourish in this life they had built and felt grateful every single day that she had gotten lost that hot August afternoon, that he had been the one to find her. On their 10th anniversary of the day they had confessed their feelings to each other, Thaddeus took Grace up to a spot on the hillside that overlooked the whole valley. The settlement spread out below them, smoke rising from chimneys, children playing in the dusty street, the sounds of life and community drifting up on the evening air. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, pulling her close against his side. "Staying here with me instead of continuing on to Oregon?" She looked up at him with surprise. "Never. Not for a single moment. This life, this place, you and our children, this is everything I ever wanted. I just did not know it until I found it." "I never wanted to settle down," he admitted. "I thought staying in one place would feel like a trap. But you showed me it could be freedom instead. Freedom to build something lasting. Freedom to be part of something bigger than myself." "We built it together," she said softly. "That is what makes it special." They stood there as the sun set, painting the valley in shades of gold and orange, and Thaddeus thought about the scared, lost woman he had tracked through the wilderness all those years ago. He thought about the lonely mountain man who had been too afraid of connection to let anyone close, and he marveled at how 2 broken people had found each other and somehow made each other whole. Below them, he could see Clementine helping her younger brothers with something, probably getting them into as much trouble as she was getting them out of. He could see neighbors gathering for an evening meal, sharing food and laughter. He could see the life they had created from nothing but determination and love. "I love you," he told Grace, the words as easy now as breathing. "I love you too," she replied, and kissed him as the stars began to emerge overhead. The years continued to roll by, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Clementine grew into a capable young woman who could track as well as her father and had her mother's gift for bringing people together. Amos developed a talent for building and became the finest carpenter in Thorn Creek, crafting furniture and homes with an artist's eye. Jasper discovered he had his mother's healing touch and began studying medicine with the doctor who had settled in the town when Jasper was 10. Thaddeus's hair went gray at the temples and then fully silver, but he remained strong, still capable of a full day's work even as he moved past 50. Grace developed laugh lines around her eyes, and her hair showed threads of white, but to him she was just as beautiful as the day he had found her sitting beneath that cottonwood tree, flushed and confused and fighting to survive. They added rooms to the cabin over the years, expanding it into a proper house that could hold their growing family and the grandchildren who eventually came. But they kept the original room as it was, the place where they had spent that first winter learning to be together, and they still slept there every night. The settlement prospered. More families came, drawn by the reputation of Thorn Creek as a good place to raise children and build a life. They added a church and a doctor's office and eventually a telegraph line that connected them to the wider world. But even as civilization crept closer, the valley retained its wild beauty, the mountains standing eternal guard over the community nestled in their shadow. Thaddeus never regretted giving up his wandering life. Oh, he still went into the mountains sometimes, still needed those moments alone with the wilderness that had shaped him. But he always came home. Because home was Grace. Home was their children and grandchildren. Home was the town they had built from nothing, the community they had nurtured into being. On a warm evening in late summer, when Thaddeus was 60 years old and had lived in the valley for nearly 30 years, he sat on the porch of their house with Grace beside him. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, Clementine's 2 daughters and Amos's son, and the sound of their laughter was like music. "Do you remember that first night in the valley?" Grace asked, her hand finding his like it always did. "When we were so scared and so hopeful at the same time?" "I remember everything about our life together," he said. "Every moment matters. Even the hard ones? Especially the hard ones. They are what make the good ones so sweet." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower. This was what happiness looked like, Thaddeus thought. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but quiet evenings with the person you loved, surrounded by the life you had built together. "Thank you," Grace said softly. "For what?" "For tracking me down that day, for bringing me home, for giving me a life I never dreamed was possible." Thaddeus kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her. "Thank you for getting lost. Thank you for letting me find you. Thank you for teaching me that home is not a place. It is people. You and our children, you are my home. You always will be." As the stars came out one by one and the grandchildren were called inside for bed, Thaddeus Irving sat with his wife in the valley they had claimed together and felt at peace. The mountain man who had tracked a lost pregnant woman through the wilderness had become a husband, a father, a grandfather, a founder of a town. And none of it would have happened if Grace had not wandered off that trail, if he had not been the one to find her. Some people believed in fate, in the idea that certain meetings were meant to be. Thaddeus did not know if he believed that or not, but he knew that finding Grace had been the most important thing he had ever done, and building a life with her had been the greatest adventure of all, better than any mountain peak he had climbed, any wilderness he had conquered. Because at the end of every day, he came home to her, and that was enough. That, was everything. The night deepened around them, and finally they rose and went inside together, hand in hand, to the home they had built and the family they had raised and the life they had created from love and determination and the simple act of not giving up. And if anyone had asked Thaddeus Irving if he had any regrets, he would have said no without hesitation. because every choice, every hardship, every moment of doubt had led him here, to this place, to this woman, to this life, and he would not change a single thing.